Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, there you have it. Almost a full hour with Kevin Hassett, chair of the NEC, with none other than David Rubenstein, live from the Economic Club of Washington. And you can see more of where that came from. Now that this is in the bag, you can watch more of David's interview with Hassett on the David Rubenstein Show. Peer-to-peer conversations, that's December 3rd. If you want to lock it in at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. Thanks for being with us on Balance of Power alongside Tyler Kendall here in the nation's capital on what is expected to be the last day of the longest government shutdown in American history. The votes are teed up for a few hours from now, and we're going to have a special edition of Balance of Power for you starting at 5 p.m. Eastern as all of this is set to get going. But Tyler, as we kind of unpack everything that we just heard from Kevin Hassett, really interesting, beginning with the shutdown itself. He says it will have an impact on GDP, which could come in quarterly between 1.5–2% for the year. He's targeting about 2%. Said inflation is not all the way down to where you want it to be, was the quote. But he agrees with the president's that rates can be a lot lower.
Right. I was actually pretty struck by the laughter in the room when he was asked why he would want to be the next Fed chair. Of course, he's on the short list for that. He also said if he's reading the tea leaves, he's looking at a likely 25 basis point cut when the FOMC meets in December. But of course, the backdrop here, the fact that we haven't gotten as much economic data as there should be as we try to weed through the forecast. We're
learning a little more about that, by the way. I guess within 48 hours of the government reopening, we'll get a new calendar from BLS, and then, you know, it's off to the races at that point. Liz Pancotti is with us, I'm glad to say, Managing Director, Policy Advocacy at the Groundwork Collaborative, having listened to that conversation and sort of noting broadly what's happening here against the backdrop of a government shutdown. Liz, welcome back. It's great to see you. This is going to have an impact on data. The question is, when do we start seeing data? BLS is going to take some time, and we're never going to fill these gaps that we have for the month of October, are we?
No, I mean, there was some data collection that was already in process prior to the government shutdown for what was to be released in October. The government shutdown on September 30th.
So we get a stale September jobs report.
We'll get a stale September jobs report. We may get some CPI indications, kind of a mini release, and then we will hopefully start to get back to collecting data. Some of the data that goes into, especially the jobs report, is reported on a pretty continual basis. It is not a survey that, you know, phone calls or online surveys have to go out to households. It's kind of incoming data. So it's sifting through that, analyzing it, and then getting the surveys back on track. That will probably take a couple weeks to get those stale reports. And then hopefully by the beginning of the year, we'll have an accurate picture. But of course, the Fed will have to meet once again before that without that full picture.
So let's talk about where we currently stand from what we do know. What are the indicators that you've been watching for as we try to piece together a picture, particularly related to the labor market? Because, of course, we're talking about 2 missed monthly jobs reports.
Yeah, unfortunately, the private sector data, as you both know, is not always the most high quality or the most sensitive. You know, we've seen ADP kind of all over the place, but what we have seen is record numbers of layoffs. When we look at, you know, the Challenger report, that to me is a little bit concerning. We had started to see layoffs tick up, but they were still within a normal range. And we got information from Challenger last week that they were really at historic highs. The other thing I have been watching is among small businesses, how hiring has been faring, and we've seen both in Gusto, another private payroll processor, and ADP, those small business numbers not look great. Small businesses obviously employ about half of workers in the United States. They have been hit the hardest by tariffs, just unable to kind of increase inventories and keep cash on the books as interest rates are very high. So those are the couple of things I am looking out for. And then we've gotten some indications that seasonal temporary hiring will be down through the holiday season, which is typically a big kind of push in many areas. We saw Spirit Halloween really slow their openings, and we are seeing for the retail spending ahead of the holiday season that not to look so great given where consumers are. And so a lot of retailers are holding back on hiring.
Caroline Leavitt was just asked about the lack of data. She's holding forth in the White House briefing room now, the press secretary at the White House. Check this out, Liz. October CPI and jobs data likely never to be released. For October, I guess you can't go back in time and get that snapshot. Will it be more difficult for the Federal Reserve to understand the impact of this government shutdown if we start putting numbers on data like this, between 1.5% to 2% growth this quarter, according to Kevin Hassett? What happens, though, when you cut off 42 million Americans from SNAP benefits for a month? When do you know what the impact of that is?
The SNAP benefits, even knowing when they'll be turned back on is something we don't know right now.
Yeah.
A lot of states were able to send out at least partial benefits, either because governors stepped in or we had a couple of late-breaking court rulings forcing some of that money to go out. The administration has not committed to a specific schedule for when those benefits will resume going out. I think, there's a tension in wanting to know what the effects of the shutdown were after the shutdown is over, and for the Fed especially and other policymakers to know what the current state of the economy is. I would put those in the opposite order of we need to know exactly what our economy looks like right now so we can make decisions about interest rates, about fiscal policy. It would be nice to have that historical look back, but missing 1 month is not catastrophic. I think the bigger issue is that we are unlikely to have that data by the Fed meeting in a couple of weeks here for the current snapshot, which is the more concerning thing to me than missing those data points. But, we saw the president a couple times in the last week say inaccurate things about how prices are down. We saw that Walmart report about a Thanksgiving meal costing less when, in fact, they were just moving around all of the items that go into that. I think the more and more that the administration tries to rely on fuzzy private market data as they, withhold that information about the typical reliable government reports, that to me is more concerning.
I did want to ask you also about the broader backdrop of the economy here when it comes to tariffs. You brought up tariffs. It was also part of this conversation that we just heard with Kevin Hassett, and he said that the administration is considering some of these other tariff authorities as the Supreme Court looks at the big one, IEEPA, those broad-based tariffs based on emergency powers. We heard President Trump earlier this week suggest that there could be $2,000 refund checks. How do these headlines jive when you have the administration looking at dispersing money from tariff revenue, but also preparing a backstop if those tariffs get struck down?
In the Supreme Court arguments last week, we really saw the solicitors struggle with how to respond to questions from the justices about these revenue effects of the tariffs. They say they're minor. The president tweets out that they're going to be $4 trillion. The president truths again that they're going to be $3 trillion and they're going to fund stimulus checks. I mean, it's really all over the place and quite incoherent. I'd say on the checks, I am not running out to put $2,000 on my credit card because I think the government will be sending me a check in the next 30 days, and I would not suggest that anyone else do so. And then, I think we're likely, even if the Supreme Court does weigh in on those emergency IEEPA tariffs, the Trump administration has signaled, and they have even started, over a dozen investigations using those other authorities on specific inputs. So that could be, copper, aluminum, semiconductors, but we could see those spread to other industries using other authorities, some of which, could allow him to enact time-limited across-the-board tariffs of 10 to 15%. Others would require 6-month, typically, investigations before they could put higher rates on them.
So there would be an interruption then, in waiting for the next round of tariffs to come in that world. Would the money need to be paid back during that period of time? I guess the court needs to decide that, Liz, and I won't make you decide that now. I guess the question I have is, what would happen? The president says it will ruin the country. It'll destroy the country. To pay back what he says is $3 trillion. It seems to be in the billions, not the trillions. But what would be the impact of writing checks like that?
There's kind of two separate things happening right here. So one is if the IEEPA tariffs that have been somewhat collected over the last 6 months by customs, there are lots of delays and lots of kind of mixed implementation of those. If the Supreme Court strikes down those tariffs, there are already companies lining up as part of class action lawsuits trying to get those refunds from the Treasury Department for the tariffs that they've paid. I think it's very unlikely those would then be passed on to consumers, though some consumers did directly pay those tariffs on, shipments to their doorstep.
So then you get the class action lawsuit going.
Correct, which is a whole other disaster in and of itself. And I think you have both seen how long it takes for lawsuits to work through our court system. So that's one aspect. The president is separately suggesting that these magical dividend checks will be sent out to consumers that are completely separate. So those would be funded by the revenue from the tariffs coming in, the tariffs which could, of course, be interrupted by the Supreme Court's ruling. But as you said, there are not $3 to $4 trillion worth of revenue. We have at most seen, $200 to $300 billion taken in revenue. And the administration has drawn on that pot of money to pay for this, that, and the other over the course of the last 6 months, trying to pay troops or trying to pay SNAP benefits or, paying for the ballroom. I mean, he seems to view this as kind of an unlimited slush fund. Whether he spends it or tweets it out, this is really not a thing I think the American people can rely on.
We actually have a great story on the Bloomberg terminal about how there's already a case forming for a class action so that we could see those tariff refunds paid out more broadly, because we know that the issue of universal injunctions has come up before with this administration on it. Sticking on tariffs, we heard from the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent earlier today, who said that we could see some potential planned reductions when it comes to things like coffee, bananas, other food that we don't grow here in the U.S. How would targeted reductions work, and does that make a dent when we're talking about potential pass-throughs and prices for consumers?
The targeted carve-outs are, very complicated to implement, as are the broad sweeping tariffs that the president has put into place. They also seem to, the administration has historically not stuck with the thing that they announced. So do I think that it will be smooth sailing for exempted coffee, bananas, et cetera? No, because none of these tariffs have been smooth sailing. I think this is a really fascinating press tour that, both Bessent and Hassett are doing right now, where they realize that American people are very frustrated with higher prices. The president campaigned on lowering prices on day one. Last week, he walked this back saying that's a 2026 priority for them. So I guess this is kicking off that tour. But, a couple of months ago, the president said groceries. What a fascinating word. I wonder where that word came from. And I guess now he has figured out that, in fact, the American people do care about their grocery prices. We, of course, do not grow coffee or bananas here in the United States. It's not so much about onshoring supply chains. It's just genuinely impossible. And so now they are exploring these, limited carve-outs. We have seen the president look at other limited carve-outs. There was a deal struck with Apple where they would be able to get out of semiconductor tariffs. These have been, implemented in different ways, and in many cases, tariffs are not being collected anyway because there's so much confusion at the border. So do I expect, bananas to magically become cheaper at the grocery store in the next couple of weeks? No. I mean, coffee's up 20-30% over the past year. And there are a number of other grocery costs that are not so impacted by the tariffs. Ground beef is up double digits over the past year, given other issues in the economy that tariffs will not really affect, though I guess the president is looking at increasing imports from Argentina to fix that problem.
Well, he does cite beef pretty frequently. That is, the whole grocery store is cheaper, but beef is the cost that we need to deal with. And of course, he's running afoul of our ranchers here in the United States, the cattlemen, who have been not terribly happy about that idea. What is his obsession with grocery? You brought this up. He says it's an old word, a beautiful word, a strange word, grocery. And then he started using BLT as a descriptor of what grocery is: bacon, lettuce, tomato. Has he ever been in a grocery store?
That's a great question.
Being serious about that.
I would love to have, a Bloomberg reporter ask that the next time that they get a press briefing question. It's a good one.
You remember the gallon of milk with George Bush? This used to be like treacherous ground for a politician. It's not anymore, is it?
Yes. I mean, I remember President Joe Biden opening up a bag of chips and saying there's not too many Doritos in here. Right. I think, maybe we'll see as part of this press tour, Donald Trump go into Kroger and take a couple things off the shelf. I would be curious.
That's typically when this stuff happens.
How long it's been since he went into a Kroger and pulled a couple things off the shelf. But, we saw in elections last week in Virginia, New York City, and New Jersey, and even in Georgia, where, power bills were on the ballot, that Americans are really frustrated by the prices they're paying, whether it's at the grocery store, at the gas pump, for rent. And I think the president hates to be an unpopular guy. His approval ratings on the economy and inflation are in the tank. And he realizes that he's going to have to get acquainted with the beautiful word groceries if he wants to turn it around.
It's an old-fashioned word, Tyler.
Yes, okay. Well, this has been great insight after that conversation between Kevin Hassett and
I'm glad we could spend some time. This is a great dive. We should keep this going, actually, as long as the press tour is on the road.
Yes, all right. Liz Pancotti, Managing Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Groundwork Collaborative. Thanks so much for joining us here in D.C. Right now, we're going to take a check on the markets because, of course, they've been watching all of this, particularly as we head closer, it seems, to reopening the government. For that, we go to Alexis Christoforous in World Headquarters in New York. Hey, Alexis.
Hey, guys. We have got a mixed market at the moment with the Dow now at its best level of the session and in record territory. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up now about 400 points, led higher by shares of United Healthcare, Goldman Sachs, Cisco, and Nike. The S&P 500 on the plus side by 11, and the NASDAQ well off its lows of the session, now down just 50 points. Big winner today was also a big winner yesterday. Shares of Advanced Micro Devices racing ahead more than 8% 5%. That's after CEO Lisa Su told a company event that the AI chipmaker will see more than 35% year-over-year revenue growth for the next 3 to 5 years. Elsewhere in stock news, Black Rock Coffee Bar recorded higher sales and a narrower loss in the third quarter in its first quarterly report as a public company. Still, shares of Black Rock Coffee Bar down 1.2%. And we've got shares of the Swiss sneaker brand On Holding up now 17% after the company boosted its sales forecast for the year. That follows better than expected third quarter results. And more Americans than ever are falling behind on their car payments. Fitch Ratings says the share of subprime borrowers at least 60 days past due on their auto loans is now at the highest level on record dating back 30 years. With ongoing inflation pressures and the return of student loan bills, millions of car owners are struggling to afford their monthly payments. To recap, stocks are mixed. The Dow up 393 points at a record high. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Alexis Christoforous. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Alexis, thank you so much. You'll be back with more on the markets coming up at the top of the hour for Bloomberg Business Week Daily. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Tyler Kendall in Washington, where we're counting down to some important votes in the House of Representatives on what is expected to be the last day of the longest government shutdown in American history. And it's a pleasure to bring in a voice from the House of Representatives now that the chamber is back in session. Democratic Congressman Khanna of California is with us live from Capitol Hill. And Congressman, it's good to see you back in the Capitol here. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. We've missed our conversations. I know that a lot of Democrats are pretty unhappy about the way this has gone in the Senate, and you're not terribly happy with the way Senator Chuck Schumer has handled things. Now that the bill is coming into your chamber, are you a no vote?
I'm a no vote because I don't believe we can sit idly by while 20 million Americans face astronomical spikes in their health care. We have a moral responsibility to make sure people have food assistance, to make sure they have health care, and we're not meeting that moment.
But Congressman, President Trump has said that he's willing to negotiate on health care. Isn't it better to negotiate with the government reopened, alleviate the stress on our air travel system, get food benefits to Americans, and pay our federal workers?
Well, we could have done all of that. I mean, the president held this country hostage. He refused to release aid, food aid for Americans, which would have cost $9 billion, while he's giving $40 billion to a corrupt libertarian in Argentina. My question for the president is, why aren't you putting Americans first? Why are you withholding aid from American kids and giving money to Argentina instead? We should have been funding the food. We should have been funding our federal workers and paying our troops. And then we could be negotiating on health care to make sure that 20 million people under Donald Trump's watch are not going to have the largest increase in health care since Barack Obama.
We understand that you will have a new colleague in the House as of a couple of hours from now, Congressman, as Adelita Grijalva is at last sworn in, having been elected on September 23rd. This means only a 2-vote margin, if you will, for Speaker Johnson in passing this CR minibus package. It also means you have the vote that you need to bring the Jeffrey Epstein discharge petition to the floor of the House. How quickly do you expect that will happen? And does it need to pass the Senate?
I expect that Adelita Grijalva will sign today. That gives us 218, and early December we will have a vote. But look, the Epstein class in American politics needs to go. These are rich and powerful people who either covered up for Jeffrey Epstein or who themselves abused young girls. And the American people are tired of it. They're tired of one set of rules for rich people who have friends who are politicians and another set of rules for ordinary Americans. So I believe the House will pass this, and it's going to send a message for the full release of the Epstein files and for the Senate to pass it.
I know that you want to bring, obviously, all members to account on this and have them take a vote, which will take place in the House. But to be clear, it does need to pass the upper chamber to force the release of these files, Congressman?
It does, and I believe that the vote margin in the House will matter. If it just ekes through, the Senate may kill it. But if we get 40, 50 Republicans, as I am hearing we may, then it's going to put a lot of pressure on the Senate to act.
We're seeing the Democrats on the House Oversight Committee release their own tranche of, I believe, 20,000 emails today. Could you give us any insight into the timing here? Is this to coincide with your new colleague coming in and momentum behind the discharge petition?
Well, we had subpoenaed the Epstein estate. I had written a letter to the Epstein estate with Mr. Comer, and we had gotten these files. And one of the things we got today were emails where Jeffrey Epstein is talking to Ghislaine Maxwell, saying that Donald Trump is aware that they're underage girls at the Epstein estate. And so it implicates Trump in the Epstein files, and there's much more to be released. But we just need it all out there. We need transparency.
You made clear on Twitter the only reason these emails are out is that at Lawrence has the survivors' lawyers on who gave me the tip to subpoena the estate. You asked, why did Justice or the FBI not get and release these? Do you have an answer?
I don't. I mean, here they were claiming they're doing a thorough investigation. They're going to do everything. And then you have a congressman who's more focused on economic issues than anything on Lawrence O'Donnell, and a lawyer for the survivors basically says, hey, tell the congressman he should write a letter to the estate. They have the documents. And so I write a letter to the estate and get the documents. And you're telling me that the FBI and the Justice Department couldn't do that? Of course they could. They haven't taken this investigation seriously. That's why Congress has gotten involved. We need a full release of the Epstein files.
In the final minute that we have you, Congressman, I know that you have been working on a ban crypto corruption legislation. Now that the House is back in session, can you give an update to us on this? And I'm also curious about the link here to your perch as the ranking member on the Armed Services Committee. What's the national security angle to this legislation?
Well, members of Congress and the president and their families should not be trading cryptocurrencies, and they should not be trading stock. But look, the president's family has made millions of dollars on cryptocurrency. They sold World Liberty as a stable coin, and they have this guy who's gotten now a pardon, a foreign billionaire who's basically accepting payments of World Liberty. This should not be going on. It makes us vulnerable to foreign countries, to foreign interests. And so my bill is simple. No trading of cryptocurrency by any elected official, whether it's in Congress, whether it's the presidency, whether it's the Supreme Court as an appointed person.
All right, Congressman Ro Khanna, Democrat representing California's 17th District. Thanks so much for joining us here on Bloomberg Television and Radio. And the California congressman isn't the only Democrat who is upset about this deal that was struck in the Senate to reopen the government. We heard earlier today from New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez catching up with reporters in the halls of Congress who laid out the stakes that Democrats are facing like this.
Federal workers across the country that have been missing paychecks. We have SNAP recipients, millions of SNAP recipients across the country that, whose access to food stability was imperiled. And we have to figure out what that was for, because you had both the capitulation in the Senate and you have the refusal and the outright cruelty among House Republicans and the White House, who went to court to try to sue for their ability to deny people's access to food. This is the reality that we're in right now, and we need to act like it.
From earlier today, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, this is obviously the rhetoric that we're hearing from the Democratic side of the aisle, having heard from Ro Khanna just now as well. We're going to be talking in a special edition of Balance of Power starting at 5 p.m. Eastern. We'll be live on Capitol Hill with members of both sides of the aisle. But we want to get a read right down the middle right now with Reilly, Bloomberg congressional reporter who's been up there all day and looking ahead to votes that could start in the 4 o'clock hour. Caitlin, now that we've heard positioning from the elected officials, talk process with us. When could this be done tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. At 4, the House will come back to vote on a rule. Before that, we'll see the swearing in of Congresswoman-elect Adelita Grijalva. From the vote on the rule, which is a procedural vote. We'll see time devoted to a debate, and then Republican leadership would like to kick off the final vote on this sometime after 7 p.m. And the hope is to be off the floor at 8 p.m. That could always change as we know Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries has what's called a magic minute, which allows him to talk for however long he would like. We're hearing that he doesn't plan to go late into the night, but that is what we're looking at now.
I don't mean to rain on the parade, but the next deadline that I'm looking at already, once the government reopens, is going to be the end of the year when we see those Affordable Care Act premium tax subsidies expire. Caitlin, what's the conversation like right now on the Hill when you are talking to Democrats who are upset about how this compromise shook out?
Yeah, absolutely. House Democrats are very skeptical of Senate Majority Leader John Thune's promise of a vote on this in the coming weeks. They've pointed out that a vote is not an outcome. There's a lot of disagreement between Democrats and Republicans on these subsidies, which, as you said, will expire at the end of this year, and we'll see premium costs spike for those enrolled on Obamacare exchanges. There is maybe some bipartisan agreement around extending the subsidies with some additional guardrails, but it's really not clear that that will come to fruition. We're having some Republicans in the Senate pitch completely alternative ideas, and so it's just not clear that this will come together.
All right, Caitlin Reilly, Bloomberg congressional reporter, joining us live from Capitol Hill. Thanks so much. And Joe, there's a lot to look out for tonight as we kick ahead to our special coverage at 5 p.m. Eastern. I'll tell you, I went back to look what we were covering on September 19th, which was the last time the House was in session. President Trump had just announced he was going to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping. That's how long ago this has been. It's
been a minute, month and a half. We haven't seen some of these members in town, and we'll be talking to them tonight when we make our way up to Capitol Hill. Hope you'll join us. As Tyler mentioned, starts 5 p.m. Eastern time, the late edition of Balance of Power. By the time we all end this day, the government should be open again, which is saying a lot.
That's the hope. The bill's going next to President Trump's desk once they get this through. Stick with us for coverage. This is Bloomberg.